All right. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to today's training, Voting as a Social Work Intervention. And our training today is generously funded by the Social Justice Innovation Initiative 2. And over the past 2 years, the SJ2 grants have allowed Kate Chaffin, Kim Crane Mallory, and I to train nearly 200 social workers to get involved in political social work as a way of challenging structural oppressions related to racism, sexism, and intersectionality. This year, Voting is Social Work and Vote ER partnered with us to train over 100 social work students and alumni to register voters. And part of what the grant asked of us this year was to find a way to make voting a sustainable part of the University of Tennessee's College of Social Work. So we're hoping today that we'll convince each of you to make voting a part of the courses you teach so that it will become a regular part of the social work curriculum for our clinical and our macro students. In today's training, you will learn why voting is social work as an intervention is important to challenge voter suppression and disenfranchisement, and you'll learn the impact of these suppression strategies on our Tennessee community. Then you'll learn about the way we've engaged students and alumni in voter registration as a part of our SJ2 grant, and you'll hear from one of our students about the way this training has positively influenced her experience at UTK. And then finally, we will share a voter registration assignment that we piloted in the spring of last year and that we believe can be adapted to fit with the content of many of our social work courses. We want to start by recognizing each of you for making the time to be here. We realize that as there is massive political unrest, there's stress with COVID, there's been many unusual weather events, and most of you are working very hard to balance your home life with your work life. We know that it's physically and emotionally draining to go through that. We're proud that you found the strength to be here today and are interested in learning with us. In terms of etiquette for our training, we ask that you please keep your microphone on silent. If you have a question, please write it in the chat, or you can save your question for the very end of our training. We will monitor the chat throughout the training and do our best to respond, but we have time for Q&A at the end with our wonderful guest speaker, Dr. Mimi Abramovitz. So at the end, we just want you to know you'll have the chance to ask her questions. So we can go ahead and get started. Dean Lori Messenger will now introduce honored guest speaker, Dr. Mimi Abramovitz.
And everybody, please go ahead and mute your mics because there's a little bit of feedback.
I'm trying to get it.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see you. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mimi Abramovitz, who is the Bertha Capon Reynolds Professor of Social Policy at the Silberman School of Social Work, Hunter College, and the CUNY Graduate Center. I don't know if this is true for any of you, but there are some people I just have a really hard time calling by their first name. And Dr. Mimi Abramovitz is one of those people. And I think it may be because the first time I came to know who she was, it was because of her written work. And so she always was the full name to me, not just Mimi. I've never in my life thought or called her that.
We'll end that today.
We'll try. I need to say that I have always really respected Dr. Abramovitz because of the way she approaches her work as a scholar activist, social work educator, that she really brings the activist into the educator part. And I think that that is, it's made her a role model for me, honestly, in my own professional life. Trained in community organizing and social policy at Columbia School of Social Work, Dr. Abramovitz currently co-leads the National Social Work Voter Mobilization Campaign, also known as Voting is Social Work. You've probably seen these things all over the place. It's really been a very successful effort, and I'm very excited about it. Her research interests include the U.S. welfare state, poverty, inequality, activism, and the impact of public policy on human service organizations, all viewed through the lenses of race, class, and gender. Widely published in social work and often interviewed in the print and broadcast media, Dr. Abramovitz is the author of several books, including the one that really brought her to my attention, which is Regulating the Lives of Women, Social Welfare Policy from Colonial Times to Present. It's now in its third edition, published in 2018, but I came to know this book from the first edition, which was published in 1988. And as someone, I was studying, I came to social work from studying women in politics in the graduate program at Rutgers University. And I was just blown away by her analysis of viewing social welfare from the lens of gender and social work activism. It's clear when you read the book that she's a social worker, and her analysis is really rooted in social work values, and that she writes with an activist spirit. And I am thrilled to learn that she is currently writing a book called Gender Obligations, The History of Black and White Low-Income Women's Activism Since 1900, which I honestly can't wait to read. We need more examples of leadership of low-income women across race as we work to repair our country and our own social work and social welfare institutions. Dr. Abramovitz has been honored with no fewer than 15 awards, most recently CSW's Significant Lifetime Achievement Award. I feel so honored and lucky to have her here today to share her knowledge with our faculty. So please welcome Dr. Mimi Abramovitz.
Well,
What-
Dr. Messenger, thank you very much for that head-swelling introduction. And I'm glad that we've had a chance to meet in person today. And I hope we will continue to be in touch with you and your school. And thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be talking about voting is social work. So I'm going to say next slide, but Julie is changing the slides for me. So I hope you'll bear with me, everybody. So next slide. Oh, no, all right, you're there. Okay, so the first important point is about the vote and democracy. You know already, I'm sure, that a healthy democracy depends on accessible, inclusive, and electoral process, and that voting is the most basic right of our democracy. But it has not been easy to get there. It took pressure from many social movements. Next. This included the women's movement. Women fought hard for the vote. And this is a picture of a women's suffrage office in Ohio in 1912. I just love to bring a little history in. And it's been 100 years since that victory. And so that anniversary was celebrated in 2019. Excuse me, next. And the civil rights movement fought long and hard for the right to vote. And many lives were lost and many people were hurt in the process. So I'm trying to say it took massive political struggles to get the right to vote. And it did not come easy. Next. So here is LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, for those who don't know who LBJ is. He signed the Voting Rights Act 100 years after the Civil War ended. I have to say that 3 times, 100 years after the law was finally signed. Next. Here are some of the things that that law did. It prohibited discrimination in voting. It expanded the franchise to more young people and more low-income people, both white persons and persons of color, the people who we serve. Lots of people who social workers serve. Next. So there are benefits to voting that social workers really need to know. These are good points to make in any argument you want to make to your fellow social workers about why we should be doing this work. First, it works on 3 levels. For individuals, higher levels of health and mental health are associated with voting. Stronger social connections, better employment outcomes, and a greater sense of individual efficacy. And some people link this with resilience, individual resilience as well. For communities, research shows that communities with high voter turnout get more attention, receive more resources, and quicker responses from legislators than communities with low voter turnout. So you might call this community resilience. And for the profession, social voting, if NASW can say that our membership has high voter turnout and we bring other people to the ballot, Then the profession's visibility and voice is enhanced and amplified. And then they have in a stronger position to lobby for the programs and services that benefit the profession, our clients, and wider society. So it works on all three levels. And there's research that documents this. And if you want, you can go to our website and find some articles. Next. Despite this long history and despite the benefits, we have a voter turnout problem. The United States has a voter turnout problem. The power of the vote, despite its benefits, remains to be actualized. Many people do not register. Many people do not vote. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this and the consequences that it has for all of us. Next. So why aren't people registered? This has been studied, polled, and so on. So here are some of the reasons. Well, first of all, there are about an estimated 51 million eligible voters, or more than a quarter of the eligible population, that were unregistered in last election, which was 2016. And yeah, so I'm repeating things that are on the slide so you can read them as well. So according to the Pew poll, the top 4 reasons for not registering to vote are listed here. I don't want to vote, so I don't need to register. I intended to register, but just didn't get around to it. Well, you know, the candidates or the issues don't inspire me. Now, I can't argue with that one too much, because that happens to all of us. I didn't want to register for privacy or security reasons. So these are reasons that keep people away. And that'll probably resonate with, as it does with me, with some of you. Next. 62% of eligible voters were not ever asked to register to vote. This, I don't know if you can read the small print here, it doesn't really matter, but the tall bar is the 60, this asks people, you know, if they were ever asked or who asked them. And each of those little bars is a teacher or a minister and so on, but the tall one, 62%, is no one ever asked me. So here's where we come in. We are in a perfect position, I'll talk about that soon, to ask many unregistered voters to vote and give them a chance to learn about it. Next. In addition to people not being registered, we have people who don't show up after they're registered. That's what Get Out the Vote is all about. So 42% of the eligible voters did not vote at all in 2016. And that bar there shows that Trump got about 27%, Hillary got 28%, but 42% didn't vote. That's the largest block. And so the voice of this sizable minority is not heard in our representative democracy. And they are more likely, as you know, to be lower income, less educated, persons of color, unmarried, and typically ignored by the campaigns who don't even try to register. I think that's changing this time around somewhat, but that's been the history. The turnout for state and local elections is much, much lower, and most people don't pay attention to them. So, and in 2018, the United States ranked 26th among industrial nations in voter turnout. And so the comparison is that 90% of the turnout was 90% in Australia, Belgium, and Chile, 80% in Austria, Sweden, and Italy, and 70% the overall average for all industrial nations. We are 26. Doesn't make sense that this rich, well-educated industrial nation has such low voter turnout. It's really a shame. Shame on us. Next. So what are the consequences of this? They're huge consequences. I call them close calls, or every vote counts. So here's some examples from recent elections that you probably heard about, but just to remind you that they have all been won. These two that I'm mentioning have been won by very, very small margins. So in the 26th election, Trump versus Clinton, Trump won Michigan by 0.2 percentage points, or about 10,000 votes. Pennsylvania by 0.7 percentage points, or 46,000 votes. Wisconsin by 0.8 percentage points, or 22,000 votes. The total was 79,000 plus votes, or 46 electoral votes. That's already small given all the people that voted. If Clinton had done 1 point better in each state, she'd have won the popular vote and the electoral college. I mean, she would have won the electoral college as well as the popular vote. 1 point more in each state. So you can see how few votes that is. Then, some of you may remember 2000 presidential election, Bush versus Gore. This was famous for a very small margin in Florida, where Bush won by 540 votes, and that swung the election to him. And some of you may remember all the hanging chads, these punches that didn't go all the way through, and they were just, I mean, it was just went on and on and on. And Gore finally said, okay, you can have it. The final gap between Gore and Bush was a little over 500,000 votes nationally. So I just can't say enough. These numbers really, I came across them recently. I knew all this, but I came across these numbers, and they're really important because they show every vote counts, every vote matters. These numbers just tell the story, period. Next. So why many people don't vote. I'm going to go over some individual, structural, and voter suppression barriers. Some of these are based on the study that our campaign did. It's on our website, and I think there's, we can put it in the chat, Julie. I think it's on one of the slides when you get there. We surveyed social workers about this very question. So, but why people don't vote? Next. So individual barriers. This is not our survey. This is, we found the same things, but this is from another study of about 4,000 non-voters aged 25 or over. So why didn't they vote? This should resonate with many people too. Or you've heard people say this. I didn't have time. I didn't have transportation. They weren't engaged with the news or just felt uninformed. They don't know who represents them. We can do something about that in schools. They didn't know how to vote or where to vote. They didn't know about the candidates or their positions. They're less informed, less interested in politics. So these are why non-voters say they didn't vote. So, you know, these are correctable. All these things are correctable. Next. And I say, guess what? Social workers reported many of the same things. And this is in our study. Social workers, we asked them, why don't social workers vote or something like that? But they didn't have to talk about themselves, just why social workers in general. Lack of information about politics and government. Their vote doesn't make a difference. Candidates don't represent them. Politics is not for them. They don't trust the political system. And Julie, there is the article, if you want to put it in the chat. It's on the bottom of that slide, or it's open access, Journal of Social Work Education. So you can just get, even if you don't have a subscription, anyone can get hold of it, I think, till the end of this month. It's been up there for a year. I think it's the 2019, I think it was October, September 2019 is the issue. Next, the structural barriers. So there are also structural barriers. You know, the voting process. If you want people to vote, what do? You make the voting process simple, convenient, accessible, and fair for everyone. But our process is not that way. We have many structural barriers, including these. So people don't get time off from their job. They lack transportation. If you, like out here, we can get to places on mass transit. But if you live in an area that does a rural area or way out in the suburbs, you may not be able to get to that. Long lines. Well, we're seeing some of that now, but there's always lines. We have to wait a long time. Confusing deadlines. Every state has a different deadline. They change their deadlines. ID requirements. People don't know what they are. They vary from place to place. If you have a felony record in many states, you still can't vote, although that's being challenged. Physical challenges, people may not be able to access the vote, to get to the polls or access the machines, and language barriers. And I'm sure there are others, but these are structural. They have nothing to do with the person. They're outside the person. These things stop people. These are correctable if our society wanted to. Next. Another reason people don't vote increasingly is voter suppression. And I say voter suppression by design because voter suppression is active efforts to deny access to the ballot because the people, to keep people who are viewed as a threat to the powers that be from voting. voter suppression. And I'm sure if you listen to the news at all, you hear about this all the time, but I'm just going to go over it a little bit. Next. So this is Carol Anderson. She's the Charles Howard Candler Professor of African American Studies at Emory University. She's the author of One Person, One Vote, White Rage, Voter Suppression. She's an expert on voting rights. And she says, voter suppression is designed, that's where I got the word from, designed to demoralize the electorate, to make people think voting does not matter, to make people think the system is rigged and that your vote doesn't count. Given what I just went over with structural and personal barriers, you can see how successful voter suppression has been, even when it was less intense than it is now. Next. Voter suppression has a long history in the United States. You've probably heard about the Southern poll tax pressed on the very poor and people of color, asking them how many, in order to vote, they have to tell you the number of jelly beans in a bowl or some other absurd, impossible question to answer. You may have even heard of some of the extreme examples of racial mob violence as showing on this map. And this violence goes beyond daily police or other acts of violence that are common, especially in communities of color that we've been hearing a lot about in the past years. So this is, I found this map on the website, and I'm going to, next slide, you'll see identify a few of them. So in 1868, 200 recently emancipated African Americans were killed by a white mob in Opelousas, Louisiana, for registering voters. In 1919, some 237 Black farmers in Elaine, Arkansas were lynched for organizing, for labor organizing and trying to organize and negotiate for better conditions. Now this one you probably heard of because it's been in the news recently. There was, I think, a documentary on it or a movie. 1921 Tulsa, a neighborhood in Greenwood neighborhood in Tulsa was bombed, burned to the ground, leaving 300 dead. At the time, it was the wealthiest Black community in the country, earning it the name of the Black Wall Street. And then this one, 2015, many in between, as you can see by that map, a lone white supremacist in Charleston entered one of the country's oldest Black churches and shot 10 worshipers in cold blood. So racial violence. Next. So racial violence has become less common, although there's been an uptick in a different kind of, we're not burning houses down, we're doing other horrific things, and some of which are leading to people being killed. But voter suppression itself is not a relic of the past. And it picked up steam in the 1980s. But it started early in the mid-70s with the rise of conservatism, what some call neoliberalism, is a term that's getting more familiar in social work. Those who gained control of the nation's political agenda began to exclude people who they feared, as I mentioned before. And why? Because it was widely assumed that unregistered voters were young, low-income persons of color. It was either assumed or known, actually. And they were assumed to vote, be more liberal or vote for democratic agendas and candidates. So don't let them vote. So how did this happen? Well, you may remember starting in the 80s with the election of Reagan, they began to attack the trade union and civil rights and the women's liberation movement, whose victories had expanded their vote. So they began to attack them and do away with restrict their victories. The 1965, this is before then, the 1965 Civil Rights Act was never well enforced. It was full of loopholes. It was poorly enforced. And then these practices trickled down to state and local city who provided too little or false information about candidates, did not train poll workers, so they were really uninformed, ignored repeated problems with absentee ballots, voter registration, malfunctioning voter equipment. And then we began to up voter suppression. These things have been going on for a long time. It's just normal, the normal course of voter suppression. And then next, since 2008. Well, after the election of the first Black president, all hell broke loose. Many laws were passed making it even harder for people to vote. And perhaps most important, the Supreme Court undid key voter protections. That is, they ended oversight of the state violations of the Voting Rights Act. And once that was done, it was easy to enact any kind of voter suppression you wanted, even though they violated the Voting Rights Act. And this was all justified by the spreading of the myth of voter fraud, especially by mail-in voting and absentee ballots, but all over the place. And as I'm sure you've heard, there's absolutely not a shred of evidence to support voter fraud makes any difference in any outcome. There's very, very little of it. Next. So here are some of the current voter suppression tactics. Some of these were going on for a long time. Some of them have been intensified. Gerrymandering the voting districts to favor the voting in power. You change the boundaries of the voting districts in that way. Purge people from the voter registration list, just kick them off. End early voting. In the Black communities, early voting and Sunday votings were voter engagement, successful voter engagement activities. Introducing these voter ID laws, disenfranchising felons, removing or relocating polling and voting sites from many places, including Native Americans and college campuses. And so you may remember during the last election, they were, I forget which state it was, some state they had like one voting place in either a host state or in a large district. Intimidation of voters on students and campuses and deception, slowing down the delivery of the US mail. I hope you've been following that story. It seems to have fallen out of the news recently, but they've been trying to slow down delivery because so many people are mailing in their votes because of COVID. Cutting short the time collection of the census. Well, I just read in the paper that the Supreme Court agreed that the census collection had to stop October 31st. They wanted to extend it to December 31st because of COVID, making it much harder to reach people. So now we're going to have, unless that's changed, which doesn't look too promising, we're going to have an extraordinary undercount. And I'm sure you all know that's going to mean that the places that this affects the funding of the states, cities, districts, and all sorts of access to resources and just population counts. And the population counts for urban areas where this is a bigger problem. They tend to be more democratic, and so there's worries about that it will really shift the political balance of power. So, okay, next. So first I'd like you to look at this video of John Lewis, the former, recently deceased John Lewis. Julie?
I was born in 1968, and
so young.
Yep, so young.
Yeah. And I feel very much this. I'm also the son of immigrants, and so I feel very much this sense of generational obligation. I basically have done nothing. I won the lottery being born in this country when I was born. I didn't have to do any of the things that you've had to do. I didn't have to make any of the choices that you had to make. And I would like you to explain to people, not only my age, but to the young people in the room, how it is that we should define this generation's challenges that we should be willing to put ourselves completely on the line for, and how we, in this age where it's not as stark as troopers standing on the bridge every day, how does this rising generation find and summon that same courage to stand up and fight the way that you did, Congressman?
Well, I must tell you, you're much better educated, you're better informed, you know, all this new technology. We didn't have a fax machine. We had one of these old mimeograph machines, just turn. You have an obligation, your generation, young people have an obligation, a mission, and a mandate to push and pull and not be satisfied and do everything possible. I tell young people all the time, I spoke at 7 college graduations this past season, and I said, the 3 young men that I met and got to know, they didn't die in Vietnam, or the Middle East, or Eastern Europe, or Central South America, or in Africa. They died right here in our own country. And I hear too many people say, I'm not going to participate. That's not my cause. We have to participate. Politics control everything that we do in America, from the time that we're born into the time we die. So you have a moral obligation, a mission, and a mandate to get out there and push and do everything you can to leave this little piece of real estate we call America a little greener, a little cleaner, and a little more peaceful for generation yet unborn.
Okay, Julie, let's go to the next one.
I'm delighted and just very happy and very pleased to be here. And to be here with my friend and my brother Jim, it
Julie,
is almost.
that's not, yeah. The slide the video must have gone on. So let's go back to get involved, this prior slide.
Okay, let me just close this out.
Sorry, folks, this is a little tricky. So the point of this is, what I wanted to say is what John Lewis is saying too, never forget what has been done can be undone. And that is our message, one of our messages for today. All these things that I talked about, they have been done, that they can be undone. And the next slide shows people manifesting that. This is a line of people signed up, waiting to vote. I think it was in North Carolina, one of the Carolinas, some waiting 8 hours just to vote. People are not taking this voter suppression lying down. They are saying, no way, I'm going to vote no matter what you do. So I see that as a very optimistic sign. People are expecting this to happen around the country. So this just arrived in my email the other day, and I just wanted to share it with you because it made me feel good. I think as of yesterday, 15 million people had already voted. So there's an enormous amount of voter participation. John Lewis might be happy about this. Okay, next. Why social work? Okay, why do we do this? I'm going to give you 6 quick reasons. Okay, reason one. Next, it's the right thing to do. Period. Reason 2. We are in the right place. Social workers, we are located at the intersection between the individual and society. This positions us extremely well to do the work of voter engagement. Just think of social workers sitting at his or her desk with a client and getting around to the point of saying, are you registered to vote? And there are clinicians now who are learning how to incorporate that into their practice, which maybe you all are doing as well. So our field training model puts us in touch with thousands of unregistered voters. Angela McLean, the CEO of NASW, said that social workers serve some 12 million clients every day, only about a quarter of which are registered. So we made our campaign, which I'm going to tell you a little more about in a few minutes, made field work the hub of our campaign for these reasons. Next, reason 3. I'm repeating these. Voting brings benefits, and I've reviewed them, but I wanted to mention them here again. To individuals, communities, and the profession, I listed them and discussed them earlier. Number 4, voting supports the mission and social justice values of social work. I'm not going to read these mandates. You should be familiar with them, but on the slide is a mandate from NASW and CSWE telling us that this is the right thing to do, that this is compatible and really a must for us to do as social work if we're committed to our social justice values. Next, reason 5, we have a long track record dating back, I'll show you, dating back. Next. Some of you may know about the National Conference of Charities and Corrections. It was one of the earliest social work organizations where And notice that charities and corrections were linked together at that time, which is an interesting thing to explore. I haven't done, but every time I say it, I think, oh, that's interesting. So the proceedings of this are online now for 100 years. So from the 1880s to the 1980s, social workers attending this meeting discussed voter-related issues and urged social work and clients to vote. So we have a long history of doing this. Next. Some of you may remember the Human Serve campaign. This was led by Richard Cloward, a social worker from Columbia, and Francis Fox Piven, a sociologist and political scientist from the CUNY Graduate Center. And they organized the Human Serve campaign. And its goal was to register clients in nonprofit organizations. And they included social work in that, obviously, but they went way beyond social work. They also helped pass the National Voter Registration Act, popularly known as the Motor Voter Bill. Think if you've heard about this. It was signed by President Clinton and it authorized voter registration at the Motor Vehicle Bureau, thus the name Motor Voter Bill. But Piven and Cloward, who had been involved with the welfare rights movement, knew that not everybody had a car. So they got the law extended to government benefit offices, public assistance, food stamps, and so on. So now that's where we work. So now we are in a position to be able to, it's legal for us to register people in nonprofit government offices or send people to the Motor Vehicle Bureau. So that's really, really important bill that that has not yet been taken away, but watch out. Next. So now I'm going to talk about the National Voter Mobilization Campaign. We picked up where Human Serve left off, and Terry Mizrahi, some of you may know, and I co-founded this campaign, which is, the nickname is Voting is Social Work. And voting is more important today than ever before. Next. So people always ask me why I got involved in this in the first place. So briefly, so I participated in the civil rights movement and valued its victories enormously, especially the right to vote for everyone. So when I started to learn about voter suppression and when it reared its ugly head, it actually broke my heart and tore me apart, really. So when Terry, my colleague, asked me if I would join her to create the National Social Work Voter Mobilization Campaign, I jumped up and screamed, yes. So here I am. Next. Here are the goals of the campaign: voter engagement and mobilization, to mobilize school, faculty, students, fieldwork directors, field instructors who register clients and constituents. We especially those targeted by voter suppression and gerrymandering laws. And then we want to integrate voter engagement and civic participation into social work education. So what we're doing today in this project that you all have is part of that. And we're hoping that lots more schools will do the same. Some have already started, but we want to pick that up on that after the election. Next. The campaign, it's important to get endorsements. So we got endorsements, about 25 now, but the important point of that is that the major social work organizations, like the Council on Social Work organizations, really, I don't know, it seemed like a week and they endorsed us. Any of you who work with boards know how long it takes to get an endorsement, to endorse someone else's activity. They just endorse us. They did it quickly. I don't know how, and whatever reason, I'm glad they did, but we won a lot of support. And once word got out, so we were going after the macro organizations. Once word got out, we started hearing from the perinatal, we started hearing from the clinical social. They wanted to endorse. So we have across the board, micro, meso, macro. We're very, very happy about that. And they've been helping us throughout this campaign. Next. The campaign, as I told you before, made Fieldworks a hub for the reasons I explained above. Next. So campaign activities. We're largely volunteer and almost totally unfunded campaign. So you should just know that. Labor of love for all of us. We use the campaign's website, which I'm going to give you a tour of in a minute or two, a series of webinars like this one, voter registration, and we distributed voter registration materials to agency schools. We mobilized and prepared social workers and interns around the country to register themselves, clients, students as well. We just spread the word in as many ways as possible. Okay, so now I'm going to see how good I am with the screen sharing. So I'm going to right, Julie, to go to screen share now? Screen share. Share. Where is my... Okay, it was up there. It seems to, oh, there it is. Okay. Let me just get it in the middle. Okay, this is the votingisocialwork.org is the website, and here it is. And so up here is the menu. So about us, we have, here's our leadership team, all volunteers, except Tanya Rhodes-Smith. You may know her. I think she's worked with you at one point, but she's the director of the Nancy Humphreys Institute for Political Social Work. So we're thrilled that she's one of the leading experts on this. Voting resources. So you can go to any one of these things and find what you need. Like you can check your registration. Okay, if you click this vote, you'll get registration. Now I want to make sure I get back to where I was without losing this thing. Okay, I did. Okay, and then you can register to vote. You can register. There's information on how to register special populations, know your rights, order an absentee ballot, finding a polling place. There are tools. Those tools are embedded in those places. I don't have time to show you them all, but please go and check them out. And then we have resources like the schools of social work. Okay, so we have for field education, students and agencies, best practices, slides, voter activities for students, assignments, things you can do, and then added resource. We have factors. This is a very good flyer. I would urge you to get this and send it out. It tells you send it to your all around your school. It tells people how the role of social workers in voter turnout, what you can do at all different levels. That's one of my favorite flyers. And then here's partisan activities you can do, what's allowed, and nonpartisan activities, all sorts of materials. Anyway, there's an annotated bibliography, it goes on and on. So there's that for resources. Get involved. This is really important. So you can, I want to urge everyone to go to this, get involved, subscribe to our mailing list, just fill in this form and submit it, and you'll get on our mailing list and hear about everything that we are doing. Sorry, get involved. Mailing list is a pledge to participate. Submit your story. So here, if you've done any voter registration, I've urged you, your faculty, your students, to submit their story here, what you did. We are collecting them. We want to tell the story of what social work did, if we get enough stories. So if you can do this, and just ask you a little information about what it is. So that's really, really important. And then a pledge to participate. If you want to participate, say what you might want to do. Here's things you can check one of these boxes and see what you can do as an organization, as a group. So we're trying to engage you. And then we also have a social media toolkit for those of you who might need help with social media. We have been very lucky. The Council on Social Work Education and NASW has been doing our social media work for us, because we're all Luddites when it comes to that. Some information about the census, and of course to donate. Okay, so now I have to stop share. Okay. Julie, where is our, okay, next. So that's the website. And then the other thing we've been doing is our activities. We're trying to refute myths that keep social workers and others from voter engagement work. So there are two key myths. Next. Myth one is that voter registration on the job is illegal. It's not. I just told you about the National Voter Registration Act, and this just repeats what I said before about it. So it's not illegal. So you have information to tell people, no, it's not illegal. The National Voter Registration Act allows this in these various places. Next, and the next one's really important. The next myth: voter registration is a partisan activity. You hear this all the time, and you may even thought of it yourself. But according to the Hatch Act, which is a rule that says what's for federal employees, what's partisan and not, what they can do. This lists what you can do and what you cannot do. Mostly you cannot endorse it. You can't be actively campaigning for somebody that's partisan. You can't be a candidate. You can't distribute campaign material on behalf of a person. But you can assist in nonpartisan voter registration drives, attend political rallies, sign nominating petitions, and so on. So there are many things, as long as you're not involved in a particular campaign, that you can do. And it's really important to let people know this, because there's an enormous amount of misinformation about this throughout the country, not just in social work. Okay, next. You can make a difference. These are some of the things you can do, sort of summary. Raise awareness of the importance of voting to social work practice and policy. Well, you're already doing that. Link voting rights to social work issues. Organize voter registration drives at your schools, agencies, or field placement. Invite candidates to speak at your community. Inform people about the candidates, election dates, where to vote, and so on. Help register clients, constituents, remind them to vote. And now, since registration is basically over, now the job is to get out the vote of everyone who you registered. Become a poll worker on election day. And we have been recommending to schools, if they're willing, to make November 3rd an excused absence from school, not so that students who want to can be excused to go to be a poll worker or a poll watcher, or even to go vote. And that with maybe asking them, and excused from the class and the field, and perhaps asking them to write up their experience as part of it, is an assignment for that. As a way to, support everything we've been saying about what we should be doing, and allow them to get out there and do it. Next. So basically what you can do, you can speak out. Your vote is your voice. Next. I'm almost done. You can support fair vote social policies, such as that'll make the electoral process more inclusive. Mail-in voting, support that. That's gotten more popular, but it wasn't. You had to have a very specific excuse in the past. Now, here in New York, I just had to say I was worried about COVID and I could get an absentee ballot. I would have had to had a doctor's note beforehand. So they've loosened that up. Hopefully that'll stay. Ranked choice voting is something you may have heard of, but it's a fairer, interesting voting process. Automatic voter registration, ex-offender enfranchisement, make national voting days a work holiday so people can have time. Campaign finance reform, just some of the fair vote policies that you can support, inform your students and your colleagues about. Next, enter COVID-19. So as you know, COVID-19 laid bare many problems in our social, economic, and political systems, including, if not especially, the welfare state, which is what I study and what we all work in. So COVID-19 has reshaped voting and the entire electoral process. Now, all these things that I mentioned were going on before COVID. It's just intensified it and made it worse. The conventions have been canceled. It's digitalized fundraising and campaign have been digitalized. Forced many states to change how people will vote, where they will vote, with unpredictable and potentially troublesome, very troublesome results. The pandemic and the press for real racial justice, Black Lives Matter movement, have refocused the nation's attention toward issues like public health and economic and racial inequality to the fore, prompting the public. And many schools of social work and many agencies have begun to revisit the characteristics of their organizations, but also what they want in a leader and how they want to organize and strengthen the electoral process and all other institutions that protect our democracy. This will test, COVID is testing our individual, community, and professional resilience that I mentioned earlier, more than ever before. Slide next. I want to end to say that voting is power, voting is a human right, and voting is social work. Next. And I urge you to be part of the solution, be part of history, join the National Social Work Voter Mobilization Campaign. Thank you.
so much, Dr. Abramovitz. That was really amazing. I learned new things today, and I really appreciate that. And we certainly are thankful for your time. And I'm just going to talk very briefly about some stuff that's going on in Tennessee. Julie, you want to? There we go. So there are two current pieces of legislation surrounding voting and voter suppression in Tennessee. The first was argued by the ACLU to the Supreme Court in regards to COVID. So the Tennessee Supreme Court ruled, not like New York, Dr. Abramovitz, but that the state must permit every eligible voter with an underlying health condition that makes them especially vulnerable to COVID-19 and any voter who is a caretaker of such individuals to vote by mail. So essentially, being worried about catching COVID is not an excuse not to vote in person. So there's a couple of reasons why you can request an absentee ballot, but that's not one of them. Even though the ACLU worked on that, they were able to get a provision if you were vulnerable or cared for someone who was vulnerable. So prior to this case, the state had refused to let anyone physically capable of traveling to the polls to vote by mail. All right, next slide. So the second law imposes jail time and fees for folks training residents of Tennessee on how to register people to vote. So this is a huge suppression tactic. Though this law was recently passed by the Tennessee legislature, it is not enforceable at this time. There is a lawsuit with the League of Women Voters versus Trey Hargett, who is our Secretary of State, that argues this is a violation of speech, association, due process, and the right to vote under the First and 14th Amendments. So the implications for this law has been, had it been enforceable, we would not have been able to hold a workshop like we did last month for social workers to learn how to register their clients to vote. So that's like the two major things going on right now. But I do want to take some time to introduce you all to Lori Gavello Lane, who's one of our amazing online MSSW students. She's in her concentration year, and she's done an extensive amount of research about voter disenfranchisement and voter suppression and what that looks like in Tennessee.
Thanks, Dr. Chafin. Can you all hear me? Okay. So I'm going to be a little bit reviewing, but also focusing more on what's going on in Tennessee. To kind of start off with, I just wanted to remind us all that back when we're looking to vote based on civil rights, Martin Luther King's first speech in the Lincoln Memorial was not, I have a dream speech. It was the give us the ballot speech. He was first called to Washington to address how the struggle for voting rights were inextricably intertwined with the struggle for social, economic justice, civil rights, and extending our democracy to all. He said, "Truly give us the ballot, and we will no longer have reason for worrying the federal government about our basic rights." The barriers intended to blockade are so seeds of disenfranchisement and that seek to deny our basic voting rights are tragic betrayals of our democratic traditions. And so these are, on this slide, indicate some of the primary barriers that we're facing in Tennessee. We've already addressed some of these, but the voting ID laws in Tennessee, you're required to have an ID to go to the poll and vote. It can be a Tennessee driver's license, a passport, a photo from the Tennessee Department of Safety and Homeland Security, a Tennessee photo ID, US military ID, but it cannot be a student ID. So don't be mistaken by taking your student ID to go and vote. You can help clients who don't have a photo ID and don't have a driver's license to get their ID by simply Googling Tennessee ID card and going through the process of assisting them. The other barrier is reduced access. So when early voting is going on right now, and primarily the polls are open from 8 a.m. to either 4:30 p.m., 5:30 p.m., or 7 p.m. in different districts. For many people who work during the day or have children that they're taking care of, it's not possible for them to start going to the polls until 4:30 p.m. or later, and then they're waiting in long lines. And so that tends to reduce their interest in or willingness to vote. In addition to that, reduced access, I've noted that people who are elderly or have disabilities are waiting in long lines. And so if they are, then they need to notify the pollsters at those sites that they need some accommodations when they arrive. In addition to that, USPS, because we've had so much inundation of people using our mail service because of COVID-19, they have delays in mail. And the mail service has indicated that if you have a mail-in ballot, you can anticipate that you need to submit it by October 27th in order to have it registered for your vote. If it's not in by the last day of voting, then it's not counted. The other issue is felonies. So in Tennessee or across the US, 20 million people have a felony conviction and 6 million people are ineligible or barred from voting. One way in Tennessee is you can restore your voter rights if you have a felony conviction. So if you Google TN felony voter rights, you can help restore clients' voting rights by doing that. One last thing, if I go back to reduced access, one way to find out where you're supposed to be voting, the times and hours of the voting sites, and whether you're currently registered is you want to Google voter lookup in Tennessee. And so you can find all that information there accessible. Next slide, please. And so this is the timeline. We've passed the date that people can register to vote for this election. That doesn't mean that you've passed the date that you can register someone to vote for the future. But you want to indicate if you're registering someone to vote, that they won't be able to vote in this primary election. Wednesday, October 14th, started early voting in Tennessee, and we have been actively out there voting. The last day to vote is October 27th. That is on Friday by absentee ballot. The last day to vote early voting is October 29th. One kind of hiccup or question is you can actually request an absentee ballot by October 27th, but because USPS is indicating that you're not going to get counted as a vote, if you submit it later than October 27th, chances are if you wait to access your absentee ballot, you won't be able to vote. So encourage people who want an absentee ballot to submit it as soon as possible. Then on election day, that's our day to finish our voting out, November 3rd. Thanks.
I just wanted to add that Tennessee ranks #1 in regressive policies surrounding felony voters. So that's something that I know Keita Haynes, who ran for Congress, is really working hard on to change those laws so that it is easier for people with felonies to reinstate their voting rights.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate and Lori, for talking to us a little bit about what has been happening in Tennessee and what the voter registration laws look like. So I'm going to talk to you now a little bit about how we've been engaging students and alumni to register voters. So at the beginning of September, the SJ2 grant funded our training called Vote Like Your Life Depends on It. And our training had 2 goals. The first goal was to educate social work students, faculty, and alumni on the importance of making voter registration a part of social work practice. And then the second goal was to provide participants with concrete tools and strategies that they could use to immediately begin registering clients and community members to vote. We had 145 people register for our training, and then we had over 100 people attend. And I wanted to highlight the way we had students attend from all campuses and all programs within UT. Most of our attendees were from the state of Tennessee, but we also had students and alumni from all across the United States. And holding the training on Zoom allowed us to provide this kind of interesting programming for both the online and face-to-face students, as well as include our alumni. We also want to highlight that many of our attendees identified as being clinical social workers rather than macro social workers. One of our goals was to support clinical students in integrating political social work into their practice. And the registration points to the idea that clinical social workers are interested in voter registration. It's not just our macro students who want to get involved in this process. The majority of our participants, nearly 70%, had never registered someone to vote before this training. And an even higher majority, nearly 90%, had never registered someone to vote in a social work setting. So this means that among participants who had experience with voter registration, it was likely to have been a part of their personal life rather than a part of their professional practice. We also found that prior to the training, our participants did not feel comfortable with or feel confident in their ability to register someone to vote in a social work setting. We saw that comfort with doing this in someone's personal life did not translate into comfort with doing this in a professional setting. During our training, we trained participants to use a tool called Vote ER to register clients and community members. The Vote ER platform uses a texting code, a QR code, and a website link to register voters, and it's designed to be used both in face-to-face and telehealth settings. Vote ER is a tool that was designed to register potential voters in the emergency room initially, and then their program has expanded to supporting social workers with registering voters in social work settings. In the past few months, their program has registered over 30,000 voters. And it's a sustainable tool that we will be able to use even going past the November election this year. So it's a tool that we can expect to be able to train students in the future and to continue to use to register voters. At the September training, Vote ER provided instruction about how to approach employers or practicum sites about voter registration, how to register voters in a nonpartisan way, and then asked participants to start registering voters immediately. To provide encouragement, we held our own voter registration contest for our participants. And so we split them into teams of 50 people each, and they've been competing to register the most voters. Collectively, our teams registered 337 voters before the October 5th Tennessee deadline to register to vote, and that's a huge accomplishment that we're extremely proud of. And so now that the deadline has passed, we're continuing to work with our participants to help them mobilize people to get to the polls and to get their absentee ballots turned in if they're eligible for that. So as a part of this contest, we have had 2 students from the online MSSW program, Miranda Dalton and Margaret McMillan, step into leadership positions as team captains of their teams in the contest. And we're so thankful and proud of them because they volunteered to lead their teams through this work. And they've worked really, really hard to craft emails multiple times a week that are providing resources and encouragement for our participants. And they've been designing action steps for our participants to remain engaged. Miranda wasn't able to be here today to share her experience, but Margaret McMillan will be speaking with us now and talking about how her experience with registering voters has impacted her social work education.
Thanks, Dr. Franks. Thanks especially for asking me to talk with y'all today and for giving me my first opportunity to learn directly from Dr. Abramovitz, something that I'm especially jazzed about. Dr. Abramovitz, thank you for taking the time to make a virtual visit to Rocky Top today. At UT, our guiding principle is the volunteer creed, one that beareth a torch, shadoweth oneself to give light to others. You and your work, especially on the Voting is Social Work campaign, are a living embodiment of this volunteer spirit. And my experience in the Voting is Social Work training has equipped me to give light to others as well. I'm an online extended study student in my concentration year of the MSSW program in the evidence-based interpersonal track. Over the last 2 years of the program, I've learned about the profession's historical shift to a direct practice emphasis and experienced personally the structural forces attempting to segment social workers into clinical or macro practice. As a clinical student, I've had a few theoretical conversations in my classes about the idea that professional clinical social workers can technically incorporate voter registration into our work at agencies and in private practice. The conversations, though, usually end on a sort of uneasy note, with students acknowledging the point, but that it's allowed, but also not quite sure what to do next. And as I began my concentration year this past summer, I was eager to immerse myself in the classes that would equip me with the real world skills to begin my clinical work. Missing from that toolbox that this program's helping me build in general, though, were the techniques and skills needed to actually incorporate voter registration and activation into my work with clients. Enter voting as social work training. In the training, I learned how to have conversations with clients about voting and how to register them in a social work setting. I learned how to broach with supervisors at agencies the subject of incorporating voter registration into our work. I learned how to situate voting in a systems perspective as a measure of clients' level of community engagement. I learned about how to do these things in a nonpartisan way. And all of this has helped me feel empowered and confident and excited in my ability to engage and activate my clients and coworkers to exercise their right to vote. It's helped me feel confident in my ability to use voting as a clinical intervention with clients. Importantly, this training has empowered me to uphold the NASW Code of Ethics in a way I wasn't able to before. Earlier this week, the college shared on their Instagram account an image celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Code of Ethics. The image highlighted Ethical Standard 6.04, which states, social workers should be aware of the impact of the political arena on practice and should advocate for changes in policy and legislation to improve social conditions in order to meet basic human needs and promote social justice. Our profession's value of social work our profession's value of social justice mandates that we pursue social change with and on behalf of vulnerable and oppressed individuals and groups of people. The preamble of the code articulates our responsibility to enhance the capacity of people to address their own needs. And not to beat a dead horse, but I also want to point out that the vision of the UT College of Social Work says that we envision a society we envision a socially just world that prioritizes the needs of the most vulnerable. All this is just to say it's critical for clinical social workers to have the skills required to empower their clients to be civically engaged and take action against the forces of oppression in their lives. These are the skills that empower clinical social workers to pursue social change with and on behalf of the clients we serve. These skills enable micro social workers to bridge the gap between micro, meso, and macro work, allowing us to work for change from multiple vantage points. By incorporating voting as social work training into our curriculum, the College of Social Work at UT has the opportunity to prepare professional social workers to not just envision a socially just world that prioritizes the needs of the most vulnerable, but to light the way for our clients and to create meaningful change to bring about that just world. And as Laurie noted earlier, early voting in Tennessee began this past Wednesday and continues through the 29th of this month. So I want to leave y'all with some action items that I learned in my voting and social work training. Make your plan to vote if you haven't already. Mark your plan in your calendar and ask 3 other people whether they need any help making their voting plans and getting to the polls this year. Just do it. It's fun too. So thank y'all for this time. And a special thanks to Dr. Franks and Dr. Abramovitz. This has been a real treat.
Thank you, Margaret. That was so good. I'm so proud of you. And y'all have done such great work mobilizing our participants and getting them get out registering people. So that's really amazing. Thank you so much for your hard work. So as an extension of the campaign school and as a sustainability plan for our social justice grant, we decided to make voting as social work a part of our courses here. We knew that we could expand the impact made by training social workers to campaign by getting social work students fully involved in the process of understanding that their clients' voices deserved to be heard. We know that students will have the most impact at their agencies with voter registration, but the missing piece to this is linking the knowledge and skills they learn in class with their agencies. Students need to understand how voting and a lack thereof impacts communities' resources, mental health, physical health. So we believe that implementing an experiential learning plan is an amazing way to connect students with content and provide a meaningful opportunity by having them actually do hands-on work. So with that in mind, Dr. Julie Franks worked tirelessly to embed a social work voting activity into social welfare policy. Though we're going to share this example with you, we would love for you to be thinking of how voting fits into your course and how important empowerment is to the overall social work process, regardless if you're clinical or macro. The first part of the course, she began introducing the idea of voter engagement as it relates to each policy the students were learning about from week to week. This set a baseline for why voting is important and how it directly impacts our clients. So she has them work on research that looks at voting laws for whatever state that they're from, and more specifically, how disenfranchisement and suppression looks in that state. Students were actually very alarmed and shocked by what they were learning about. However, they were still really apprehensive about the whole voter registration process and asking people if they're registered to vote. So I'm going to let Julie tell you about her assignment, but I want to say that this project has now been adopted by Voting is Social Work, and it's been shared with social work programs across the country. So really amazing work, Dr. Franks. I'm so proud and excited about what a huge impact this grant has had thus far and the impact that it promises for the future. So Julie, why don't you finish up explaining that and we can get to questions and answers with Dr. Abramovitz.
So I'll just briefly share my assignment that I designed, and then if anyone is interested in it, I have it typed up in a much more detailed version that I can send anyone who would like it. So like Kate said, I created a 3-part assignment, and this built on the knowledge that we've been learning about social welfare policy in a number of different areas throughout the semester. So this came towards the end of the semester. And it started with a research paper on the topic of the voting laws in the state where the student was practicing social work. Most were in Tennessee, but we had students across the country. They learned about voter disenfranchisement and suppression in their states, and they wrote a research paper about that. The students were really nervous about this. Most of my students were clinical and had never learned about voter laws before and felt lost. So I ended up creating a curated list of different articles and resources to get them started, as well as helping them with key terms they could use to search through libraries and different databases. So after they wrote this research paper, they were asked to register at least 3 people to vote. And I supported them early in the semester in making a plan. So that at the beginning of the semester, they turned in their idea for where they would register voters. And that was for me to help them make sure that they were participating in a nonpartisan way, and then also just to make sure that everyone had a plan. So people planned to register voters in person. We did have students who were able to do that, but because COVID-19 shutdown started right before this assignment came to fruition, most students needed to shift their plan, and they started having to register voters online rather than attend these in-person events. And it was a really interesting way for students to learn about the way voter registration was impacted across the country when COVID-19 shut down, because almost every single student's event that they signed up for as someone to register voters was canceled. So students got to learn firsthand just how much this voter suppression was magnified by COVID-19, and it ended up being a great learning tool. After students did register voters, most of them online, they wrote a reflection paper about their learning, their experience, and relating their experience to the laws they had researched earlier in the semester. So for our outcomes of this assignment pilot, we had 36 students participate, and they are known to have registered at least 80 people to vote. That's the people they registered that they know for sure. Many people, though, also shared voter registration links on social media, and they believe more than 80 were registered, but that's how many we can count for sure. Of the 36 students, 5 students were not registered, and they registered themselves to vote for the very first time. So we had 5 students of ours register. They registered high school students, family members. They registered clients with felony records and went through that process with them, which was really nice to hear about and see. And a number of people registered their grandmothers who had never voted and had never thought voting was important. So the knowledge that they gained through that research paper helped them convince folks to really register to vote who had never been interested. They did this on social media, over the phone, FaceTime. I had a couple students set up a little voter registration center in a Starbucks and register random people that walked in. So it was really interesting to see what students did. In their reflection papers, they by and large talked about how confident they felt after going through this assignment and the process. Students were really anxious and really scared to register voters. And they remarked time and again how easy it was and how they wish they'd known how easy it was before the assignment. They talked about how they plan to incorporate this into their social work practice going forward since they had gained that confidence and skill. And they talked about just how empowered they felt as they empowered someone else to have a voice in their community. That was really touching and empowering to see, and it was really a beacon of hope during those COVID-19 shutdowns. And then on the screen, it's hard to see because it's small, but this is a picture of one of the sections that I taught in 510 when we talked about just how many people they had registered. They just had these huge smiles on their faces, and they were so proud of their work. So I wanted to share that with you. And so with that, we can start our Q&A with Dr. Abramovitz. I'll take my slideshow down so she can see your faces. And you're welcome to unmute your microphone and ask a question or share a question in the chat.
Before you start, let me just say I was so delighted with your discussion of voter ER because they partnered with us. They found us, Voting and Social Work, and asked to partner with us. So we've been partnering with them and sending out all that information for a few months now. So it was just nice to see that how that's spreading through. And I just also want to say that I'm totally impressed with what I've just heard. Everything from what's going on in Tennessee to the student activities, to the voter information. I really would like to find a way to capture some of this, as I mentioned before, so we can begin to use it. So see what you can put into the website, but I think maybe we might want to, like your report, Julie, was very interesting. We need to get those reactions out to people. We have to let people know what they are. And if any others you may have had used that assignment or done similar things. So I plan to be in touch with you as we move along, maybe not before the election, but after that, as we try to give voice to all this work that's been done. And maybe we can write something, do something with it. I don't know yet, but anyway, I just wanted to put that on the table. Okay, you can ask me questions, but you can ask other people questions too. There may be some in the chat. Sometimes people put their questions in the chat.
I have a question. This is Margaret. Dr. Abramovitz, how do you, when you encounter a person who you're trying to register to vote, who's heard it all before, who gets it, but who still hasn't taken the step to actually vote. Is there one thing that you found you can say that's been the most effective to really sort of drive the point home and to inspire that action?
You know, I've been sheltering in place for such a long time. I haven't been doing a lot, and I haven't done it online. So, but I think that listening to other people who have, that it really, you have to really use your social skills and tune in to where the person is at. And at another webinar, a clinician was talking about how she's integrated this into her practice. And she said she struggled with it because it's the same thing in the classroom. And I'm on sabbatical, so I'm not even in front of students this year, so I'm a little isolated. But so she talked about how she learned to do it and she's gotten increasingly comfortable. But she also said that she tries to first of all, not impose this on her clients at all, but to link it to what the issues they're raising with her. And at some point she's gotten comfortable saying something like, if they're talking about being hungry or whatever, are you registered to vote? Because you could make the difference in this area for yourself. And so trying to link it to obvious and less obvious things. And she finds that it's worked very, very well. You don't have to hesitate to do that. And I think for social workers, what we can say in general is that if you're a client and you're interested in resources from the government, voting makes a difference. You know, that if you're talking to someone about, I can't get my food stamps, well, if we had policies, there are policies that could support this, we have to vote to make sure we had them. That's a connection we can legitimately make in our role as social workers. I would argue against, wagging your finger and then say, oh, naughty, naughty, So I think I'm telling you what you already know. You will probably know more about that than I do. But yes, I think we have to grow comfortable doing it in the classroom and with our clients in ways that are integrated with the work that we're doing. And really you have to be nonpartisan, and that's what people often talk about, how hard it is to keep their own views, especially today, out of the picture. But that's really, really important. We have to with our campaign, but you also too, because we'll all get in trouble if we start campaigning.
Thank you.
You could ask some of your colleagues of the work they're doing. You might want to ask them, if you don't have a chance to talk to them in person now, this will be a good chance, about the assignment, about the work in the classrooms and Tennessee rules. They may know more about that than I do.
Dr. Abramovitz, we have a question for you from Dr. Lizzie Bolin. What are strategies for assisting persons who don't have time to wait in line to vote? I was shocked today to see how many people were in line waiting to vote this morning when I went to vote. It's a whole day affair. How can we assist those who don't have the ability to take a day off from work?
I don't know. You're asking me practitioner questions, and I'm more of a policy person than a practitioner, so I'm getting a little caught up short on this. But I mean, if somebody doesn't have time, I guess what I would do is I would ask them to try to negotiate with their employer for time off, to try to get, if it's the reason they can't leave their kids at home alone, either if they can bring their kids or if they can recruit someone to help them. I mean, people are really between a rock and a hard place, especially now with COVID, so it makes it even, there were long lines beforehand and now they're even longer. And then I would also recommend that when people go online, they stand 6 feet apart. And I would recommend, this is not to your question, but this is in addition, that they bring food and a chair. Some places people are supplying those. Volunteers are going up and down the line saying, you need a chair, or I'll stand in place. I'll stand in your place if you have to go to the bathroom. So, I mean, but I guess I have to say that we shouldn't have to be talking about this. To me, it's just like criminal that we have to figure out, how can we help people stand online to vote? So I think from my macro policy self, I'd say we got to fight those laws tooth and nail. We should not have to be in a position to do that. It's right to help people. We have to do that. But if think about it, we shouldn't have to be, that should not be the social worker's task. And we should be.
I lived in Oregon, and it was a mail-in ballot. And it's so totally unpolitical there when it comes to voting. And it's just stunning to be in Tennessee and see these lines and to see the commitment that people have to voting. I'm humbled by it, but I'm also horrified that we have to do it like this here.
Yeah, I have good friends in North Carolina, activists they've actually organized so that they're keeping a running list of what are the wait times at different places so people can check in, and they're like, hey, come here, the line's gone down, come to this one. And so like people are checking Facebook to see where they ought to go, or texting, and it's on their, they're using it on their Facebook page for the local NAACP. And so I do think that kind of organizing is something that actually social workers could be a big part of, and students, to try and let people know what's available, and line sitting for people and that kind of thing. But it is craziness.
You see, we've been put on the defensive since the social movements have been under attack for the past 30, 40 years. We've been put on the offensive. We were having to just protect and preserve and do these runarounds that we've just been talking about, instead of expanding and getting access to more rights and better policies. We're constantly just trying to hold on and keep them from being taken away. It's a very, very sad time. I mean, the 30 years before Reagan, the 40 years after World War II, welfare state history, that's when the welfare state expanded. That's when these rights were expanded. That's when these struggles that I mentioned earlier were going on. And there were many, many problems, especially racism and sexism in the welfare state, for sure. But it was a more optimistic time, and people were winning battles. And so the backlash that resulted has gotten, there's always a backlash, but the backlash has gotten horrific, and we are living through it right now in a way that I always say I feel fortunate I was around for the other period, a little bit of the other period, because I really think what is done can be undone. It does not have to be this way. We had better times. And like Lori said, organizing is one of the best ways to work on getting us back to them. Voting is organizing, but organizing and just keeping your eye on those policy prizes and doing everything you can to make them happen. At some point, they're going to have to listen to the people and make those changes. See, I'm much better at policy speeches. Although I was trained as a community organizer, so that's the kind of practice I have done and I'm doing now, and I love it.
Dr. Abramovitz, we're at time, and I'm certainly not trying to cut you off, but I know your time is very valuable. So it's up to you what you want to do from here.
I can stay on a little bit longer. I don't have to be backed up to this. So if anyone wants to talk some more, I'm happy to.
I have a question. I wonder, I think one of the things I'm best at doing is writing. So maybe placing op-eds or whatever. Is there a thing you recommend we can do as like faculty advocate writers to influence this, if that's a skill that we have?
Yes, I think that's really important. So, I mean, try your local papers first if you think you can get something into there, a letter, an op-ed. And, I don't know how conservative or liberal your papers are, but it isn't easy, but if you have the time, it's worth a shot. There's something called the New Social Worker. You can find newsocialworker.org, and it's kind of a little bit between a newsletter and a blog. Check it out, because they've been writing about this campaign, and I think some of the stories that I've just heard from you all written up would be a really good place. And I think it has a pretty decent distribution. We've written some things for them on the campaign in the past. If you it's harder to, so your choice is, do you want to go into an academic journal, which people read or don't read, or some more public things. So those two are more public. If you want an academic journal, I think, social work education might be interested in some of these. So if you can put together a little more conceptual piece as opposed to descriptive piece for an academic journal, use your academic sort of frameworks for that. CSWE and the president and director have been very, very supportive of this. I'm not saying this because I know this for sure, but I can't imagine they wouldn't be interested. There's also NASW puts out something called The Advocate. I don't know what they take, what they do, but it's about The Advocate. So you could put together, voting a social work in Tennessee, and really to concretize it with these great case studies that you've had. Each one, everything you've said could be put together, that all of you together, put them together and summarized and with quotes and descriptions. I think it could make an article, and I'd be happy to work with anyone. I'd have to take a look at it if you write it, if you think that would be helpful. For you can have a little more bigger word count and something like maybe like 15 pages, counting references and all that for the academics. You probably know that. For the other ones, I think New Social Work likes 500 words. And they'll edit you down a little bit if it's a little longer. She's the editor, Linda Grobman, is very receptive. And I think she'd particularly like to hear from other, a place like Tennessee, which we don't expect this kind of things to be going on. There you are in the almost South, so, and also student voices. People are always eager for student voices. So I think you have a lot of basis for doing things. And if you have a group of people who want to sit and chat with me about it, I'd love to do that. Does that help?
Dr. Abramovitz, I can say for myself, and I'm sure others here, that I am gobsmacked about thinking about writing an article with you about what we've done, and we would cherish you being a part of that. And I do think it is definitely worthwhile writing about, because I think people in the South need to know that we can mobilize and we can get people back into voter engagement. And, someone has to be the leader in that, though we are not the leader in many things in terms of voter suppression. We could be the leader in turning the tide.
It's a great title. That's great. You don't have to worry about including me as an author in that. I wasn't, if you want to, that's fine, but I was really suggesting just helping.
No, I feel like I would be like, that might be the feather in my cap of life.
Well, I think it's a project. Let's talk about it. Whoever you bring together, we can have a Zoom call about it. And Julie can teach me some more tricks about Zoom.
Well, if no one else has any questions, we are so thankful for your time today.
Thank you. This has been fun. Doing the work I'm doing way sort of up there in the macro and national, to hear that it's actually being, to use a big word, operationalized, actualized on the ground is so rewarding for me. So that it's a two-way street. And thank you for having me.
Yeah. Also, I don't know if you noticed, but we had 34 of our faculty members